mom, Her sons couldn't be doctors, so they might as well have a big, position in God's kingdom. So she comes up in this big, grand gesture, and, her sons are next to her. She kneels before Jesus in order to ask him something, And Jesus says to her, "What do you want?" And she said to him, "Say that these 2 sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your kingdom." And this isn't in the text here, but I just have this feeling that if you were looking at Jesus' face, he would raise one eyebrow. And if he had said something else, it might have been, "Seriously? Are you really asking for that? After all that I just said and after all that I'm going to do, you're asking for this, Mrs. Zebedee? Are you sure you don't want to go back and reconsider? How about I give you a copy of the CD, or you can go out to my website and download it. The first will be last." He didn't say any of that. But he did say this, verse 22, Jesus answered, "You don't know what you're asking for." You're listening to the default program, people. And then he goes on and says, "Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink? Are you willing to be the kind of servant that I am showing you I am going to be?" And so here James and John speak up. "We are able." Yeah, right. We know how that story turned out. He said to them, "You will drink my cup." And it was true. The disciples ended up really laying down their lives for the sake of the gospel. I know tradition tells us that John was the only apostle that actually died a natural death, but tradition also tells us that it was after they tried to boil him in oil. But I guess maybe after this little incident, John got kind of thick-skinned, and so the oil, just didn't hurt him. Never mind. Anyway, he says, "You will drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father." Sitting at the right hand and the left hand of God was the place of absolute honor in God's kingdom. And actually, the person sitting at the right hand of the Father is who? It was the Lord himself, because that's the place that had been prepared for him. Revelation chapter 4 tells us that there's a place as well for the apostles, the 24 elders. They're sitting in thrones themselves, and they're sitting around the throne of God. Now, okay, why did Mrs. Zebedee do this? Why did James and John kind of put her up to it? Did she put them up to it? What's the deal with that? It's just so surprising that they would come to this kind of a place to ask Jesus this kind of a question. But it just shows, and I love it, it just shows how human we really are and how we really don't get it. And when we come to the Lord and we think, I've got it kind of all wired here, Lord, ready to put me to work. I can take a position of power and I'll do you proud. He says, well, I got some stuff for you to do, all right. You may not think it's the stuff that you had in mind to do, and you're going to go through some pretty difficult things in order to get there. It was interesting, Margaret and I were talking the other day, and realizing that God's really brought us through a lot of stuff in our lives. And we've kind of come to realize, and this isn't necessarily going to be an easy thing to hear, okay? It might go contrary to some things that you've heard. But God has this way of putting His servants in harm's way. And we think, well, I'm serving God, so I'm bulletproof, right? I have the shield. It's just something fires at me, man, it's just going to bounce right. I've got the shield of faith, right? I'm not going to be hurt by this. And the truth of the matter is that although we have been rescued from a lot of things, we have rarely come out unscathed. It's tough. Some things are temporary, some things are more permanent. But I think that's actually important for us to understand as a concept for Christians. Look at the life of the Apostle Paul. Wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, saw the Lord Jesus himself, was called to bring the gospel to the Gentiles in many ways. Because you're sitting here today as a believer is thanks to the Apostle Paul, and you'd think, man, that guy's going to be, if anybody could sit at the left hand of God, it would be the Apostle Paul. He ought to have been bulletproof, but look at his life. The guy, he was a walking target. He was stoned, and he was shipwrecked, and he was beaten up, and he was, harangued by people left and right. Everybody hated him, and nobody liked him, and he's going to go eat worms. He's just... The people who serve God will arrive safely in his kingdom, but they will often come there scarred, just as Paul was. That's what it's like to serve God. And, he says, you will drink my cup. Clinging to me is a good thing. It's a right thing. It's the only thing. But just understand, it does come with a price. So here's Mrs. Zebedee, James and John, she's probably still on her knees, thinking, what did I just do? And the other 10 disciples, Matthew among them, are standing around and they can't believe it. What do you guys think you're doing? It says here in verse 24, when the 10 heard it, they were indignant at the two brothers. The sons of thunder. I'm sure they were wanting fire to come down from heaven and consume them right there. And so Jesus says, gotcha. This is exactly where I wanted you to be. Lay it all out. You who want power and position, and you who really wanted it but were too afraid to ask for it. And how dare these guys rise above us? We're all the same. There's this idea of fairness, and so Jesus says this statement. He says, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. The words there, lord it over and exercise authority. In the Greek, lord it over basically means to have dominion. It's kind of, the word kind of speaks of a foreign authority that can come in and take over, right? And then to exercise authority basically means to take that authority that they have been given and actually do something with it. Basically to make you do something that you want people to do and they don't necessarily want to do. And Jesus says, that's not the way it is in my kingdom. That's not this character. That's not the vineyard owner. That's not the person that's going to go to Jerusalem and give up his life. And that's not who you will be either. I wonder if Mrs. Zebedee had come and knelt before Jesus and said, here's my two sons. Boys, do what he says. How different that conversation would have gone. And I wonder about us. When we come before the Lord and we say, Lord, have I got a great idea for you? And he says, and I've got a pretty great idea for you too. But if we had come and we'd say, whatever you want, man, that's dangerous. But it's also good. So then they're going along, and here's the other side of the parenthesis. Here's the bracket on the other side. Now they're really approaching Jerusalem now, right? I think Jericho's about 20 miles southeast of Jerusalem. It's